Characters on the Beach and Estiwini, Brighton. On bathing and bathers' advantages, of shampooing French, decency Brighton politeness sketches, of character the bankers, widow Miss Jeffreys Mrs. F.L. Peter paragraph, the London correspondent Jack Smith the French consul Paphian divinities C.L. Esque, squeeze into the libraries the new plunging bath chain Pier Cockney comicalities Royal Gardens the clubhouse. The next morning early, I proceeded to the beach to enjoy the delightful and invigorating pleasure of sea bathing. The clean pebble shore extending, as it does here, for a long distance beneath the east cliff, is a great advantage to those who, from indisposition or luxury, seek a dip in the ocean. One practice struck me as being a little objectionable, namely, the machines of the males and females being placed not only within sight of each other, but actually close alongside, by which circumstance, the sportive nymphs sometimes display more of nature's charms to the eager gaze of her wanton sons than befits me to tell, or decency to dwell on. I could not, however, with all the purity of my ethics, help envying a robust fellow who was assisting in clucking the dear unencumbered creatures under the rising wave. 1. Some of the female bathers are very adventurous, and from the great drawback of water, many accidents have occurred. I was much amused one morning with 3 sisters, in the machine adjoining mine, continually crying out to a male attendant to push on and not be afraid of the consequences. "We can all swim well," said one of the Miss B.S., well known as the Marine Graces. "But my machine ain't watertight," replied the bathing man, "and if I trust it any farther in, I shall never be able to get it out again." A Frenchman who came down to bathe with his wife and sister insisted upon using the same machine with the ladies. The bathing women remonstrated, but Monsieur retorted very fairly thus: "Mon Dieu, vat is dat vat you tell me about decence. Tromperie shall I no dip mon femme a sour myself with quite as much bienseance as dat vulgar brute vat I see ducking de ladies yonder." 306 The naiads of the deep are a strange race of mortals, half fish and half human, with a masculine coarseness of manner that, I am told, has been faithfully copied from their great original, the once celebrated Martha Gun. It is not unusual for these women to continue in the water up to their waists for 4 hours at a time, without suffering the least affection of cold or rheumatism, and living to a great age. A dingy empiric has invented a new system of humbug which is in great repute here, and is called shampooing. A sort of stewing alive by steam, sweetened by being forced through odoriferous herbs, and undergoing the pleasant sensation of being dabbed all the while with pads of flannels through holes in the wet blankets that surround you, until the cartilaginous substances of your joints are made as pliable as the ligaments of boiled calves' feet, your whole system relaxed and unnerved, and your trembling legs as useless in supporting your body as a pair of boots would be without the usual quantity of flesh and bone within them. The stain affords excellent subject for the study of character, and the pencil of the humorist. The walks round are paved with brick, which, when the thermometer is something above 86 in the shade, the case just now, is very like pacing your parched feet over the pantiles of a Turkish stove. There is, indeed, a 307 grass plot within the rails, but the luxury of walking upon it is reserved for the fishermen of the place exclusively, except on some extraordinary occasion, when the whole rabble of the town are let loose to annoy the visitants by puffing tobacco smoke in their faces, or jostling and insulting them with coarse ribaldry, until the genteel and decent are compelled to quit the promenade. I have had 2 or 3 such specimens of Brighton manners while staying here, and could only wish had the assistance of about 20 of the Oxford Togati, Trinitarians, or bachelors of Brasenose. I think we should hit upon some expedient to tame these brutes, and teach them civilized conduct and Herculean labor, which the town authorities seem afraid to attempt. The easy distance between this and the metropolis, with the great advantages of expeditious traveling, enable the multitudinous population of London to pour forth its motley groups, in greater variety than at any other watering place, Margate excepted, with, however, this difference in favor of the former, that the mixture had more of the sprinkling of fashion about them. Here and there a name of note, a splendid equipage, or a dazzling star, to illumine the dull nomenclatures in the library books of the Johnsons, the Thompsons, the Browns, and the Levis. The last-mentioned fraternity congregate here in shoals, usurp all the best lodgings, at the windows of which they are to be seen soliciting notice, with their hooked noses, copper countenances, and inquisitive eyes, decked out in all the faded finery of Petticoat Lane or Bevis Marks. While the heads of the houses of Israel run down on a Saturday, after the stock exchange closes, and often do as much business here on the Sabbath, in gambling speculations for the account day, as they have done all the week before in London. Here, too, you have the felicity to meet your tailor in his tandem, your tilde 308 tilde butcher on his trotter, your shoemaker in a fly, and your wine merchant with his bit of blood, his girl, and Tilbury, making a greater splash than yourself, and pleasantly pointing you out to observation as a long-winded one, a great gambler, or some other such gratuitous return for your ill-bestowed patronage. To amalgamate with such canaille is impossible. You are therefore driven into seclusion, or compelled to confine your visits and amusements to nearly the same circle you have just left London to be relieved from. Among the observed of the present time, the great star of attraction is the rich banker's widow, who occupies the corner house of the Grand Parade, eclipsing in splendid equipages and attendants an Eastern nabob or royalty itself. Good fortune threw old Crony in my way, just as I had caught a glimpse of the widow's cap. You know his dry, sarcastic humor and tenacious memory, and perhaps I ought to add, my inquisitive disposition. From him I gleaned a sketch of the widow's history, adorned with a few comments, which gallantry to the fair sex will not allow me to repeat. She had just joined conversation with the Marquis of H., who was attended by Jackson, the pugilist. An illustrious personage and a noble earl were on her left, while behind the jolie dame, at a respectful distance, paced two liveried emblems of her deceased husband's bounty, clad in the sad habiliments of woe, and looking as merry as mutes at a rich man's funeral. See plate. She has the reputation of being very charitable, said I. She has, responded Crony, but the total neglect of poor Wewitzer in the hour of penury and sickness is no proof of her feeling, much less of her generosity. I have known her long, continued Crony, from her earliest days of obscurity and indigence to these of unexampled prosperity, and I never could agree with common report in that particular. I dare say I looked at this moment very tilde 309 tilde significantly, for Crony, without waiting my request, continued his history. Her father was the gay and dissolute Jack Kinnear, well known in Dublin for his eccentricities about the time of the rebellion, in which affair he made himself so conspicuous that he was compelled to expatriate and fled to England by way of Liverpool, where his means soon failing, Jack, never at a loss, took up the profession of an actor and succeeded admirably. His animated style and attractive person are still spoken of with delight by many of the old inhabitants of Carlisle, Rochdale, Kendal, and the neighboring towns of Lancashire, where he first made his appearance in an itinerant company, then under the management of a man of the name of Bibby, and in whose house, under very peculiar circumstances, our heroine was born. But merit and worth from no condition rise, act well your part there, all the honor lies. That little Harriet was a child of much promise, there is no doubt, playing, in her mother's name, at a very early period, all the juvenile parts in Bibby's company with great eclat until she attained the age of 18, when her abilities procured her a situation to fill the first parts in genteel comedy in the Theatres Royal Manchester and Liverpool. From this time her fame increased rapidly, which was not a little enhanced by her attractive person and consequent number of admirers. For even among the cotton lords of Manchester a fine-grown, raven-locked, black-eyed brunette, arch, playful, and clever, could not fail to create sensations of desire. But at this time the affections of the lady were fixed on a son of Thespis, then a member of the same company, and to whom she was shortly afterwards betrothed. But the marriage, from some capricious cause or other, was never consummated. The actor, well known as Scotch Grant, is now much reduced in life, and a member of one of the minor companies of the metropolis. On her quitting Liverpool in 1794, she played at the Stafford Theatre during the election contest, where, having the good fortune to form an intimacy with the Hortons, a highly respectable family then resident there, and great friends of Sheridan, they succeeded, on the return of that gentleman to Parliament for the borough of Stafford, to obtain from him an engagement for our heroine at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, of which he was at that time proprietor. "Brevity is the soul of wit," said Crony. "I shall not attempt to enumerate all the parts she played there. Suffice it to say, she was successful and became a great favorite with the public. It was here she first attracted the notice of the rich old banker, who, having just discarded another actress, Mrs. Mr., whom he had kept some time, on account of an intimacy he discovered with the lady and P., the oboe player, he made certain propositions, accompanied with such liberal presents, that the fair yielded to the all-powerful influence, not of love but gold. And having, through the interference of poor W., secured to herself a settlement which made her independent for life, threw out the well-planned story of the lottery ticket as a tub to the whale. A stratagem that for some time succeeded admirably, until a malicious wag belonging to the company undertook to solve the riddle of her prosperity, by pretending to bet a wager of 100 that the lady had actually gained £20,000 by the lottery, and he would name the ticket. With this excuse, for what otherwise might have been deemed impertinent, he put the question, and out of the reply developed the whole affair. All London now rung with the splendor of her equipage, the extent of her charities, and the liberality of her conduct to an old actor and a young female friend, Miss S.N., who was invariably seen with 311 her in public. Such was the notoriety of the intimacy that the 3 married daughters of the banker, all persons of title and the highest respectability, thought it right to question their father, relative to the truth of the reports in circulation. Whatever might have been their apprehensions, their fears were quieted by the information that the lady in question was a natural daughter, born previous to the alliance to which they owed their birth. This assurance not only induced the parties to admit her to their presence, but she was also introduced to, and became intimate with, the wife of the man to whom she owes her present good fortune. It was now that, feeling herself secure, she displayed that capricious feeling which has since marked her character. Poor W.R., her mentor and defender, was on some mere pretense abandoned, and a sturdy blustering fellow in the same profession substituted for the sincere adviser, the witty and agreeable companion. It was to Artie she sent a present of £1,000 for a single ticket on his benefit night. But her ambition had not yet attained its highest point. The banker's wife died, and our fortunate heroine was elected to her place, while yet the clay-cold course of her predecessor remained above ground. A circumstance which brought down a heavy calamity on the clerical who performed the marriage rites, too, but which was remedied by an annuity from the banker. From this period, the haughty bearing of the lady exceeded all bounds. The splendor of her establishment, the extravagance of her parties, and the munificence of her charities, trumpeted forth by that many-tongued oracle, the public press, eclipsed the brilliancy of the 2 Saturnine B.N., the author of The Stage, a poem, on hearing the day after her marriage with the banker, a conversation relative to her age, said he was sure the party were all in error, as there could be no doubt the lady was on the previous night under age. Royal banquets, and outshone the greatest and wealthiest of the stars of fashion. About this time, her hitherto inseparable companion made a slip with a certain amorous manager. And such was the indignation of our moral heroine on the discovery, that she spurned the unfortunate from her forever, and actually turned the offending spark out of doors herself, accompanying the act with a very unladylike demonstration of her vengeance. Beatty, her most obsequious servant, died suddenly. Poor doctor! J.A.S., who gave up a highly respectable and increasing practice in Greek Street, Soho, as a physician to attend, exclusively, on the Jude Aldmone and his rib, met such a return for his kindness and attention that he committed suicide. Her next friend, a Mr. G.N., a very handsome young man, who was induced to quit his situation in the bank for the office of private secretary, made a mistake one night, and eloped with the female confidant of the banker's wife, a crime for which the perpetrator could never hope to meet with forgiveness. It is not a little singular, said Crony, that almost all her intimate acquaintances have, sooner or later, fallen into disrepute with their patroness, and felt how weak is the reliance upon the capricious and the wayward. On the death of the old banker, our heroine had so wheedled the dotard, that he left her, to the surprise of the world, the whole of his immense property, recommending only certain legacies and leaving an honorable and high-minded family dependent upon her bountiful consideration. I could relate some very extraordinary anecdotes arising out of that circumstance, said Crony, but you must be content with one, farcical in the extreme, which fully displays the lady's affection for her former profession and shows she is a perfect mistress of stage effect. On the removal of the shriveled remains of the old dotard for interment, his affectionate rib accompanied the 313 procession, and when they rested for the night at an inn on the road, guarded them in death as she had done in the close of life, by sleeping on a sofa in the same room. Cruel, cruel separation. What a scene for the revival of grief a la mode, but she is unhappy with all her wealth, said the cynic. Careless as some portion of our nobility are in their choice of companions for their sports or pleasures, they have yet too much consideration left of what is due to their rank, their wives, and daughters, not to hesitate before they receive. But never mind, said Crony, you know the rest. You must have heard of a recent calamity which threatened the lady, and on which that mad wag, John Bull, let fly some cutting jokes. A very sagacious police magistrate, accompanied by one of his indefatigables, went to inspect the premises, accompanied by a gentleman of the faculty. But after all their united efforts to unravel the mystery, it turned out a mere scratch, a very flat affair. I think, said Crony, we have now arrived at the ultimatum of the widow's history, and may as well take a turn or two up the Stane to look out for other character. The ancient female you perceive yonder, leaning on her tall gold-headed cane, is Miss J.S., a maid of honor to the late Queen Charlotte and the particular friend of Mrs. F.L., said to be the only one left out of 8 persons, who accompanied 2 celebrated personages many years since in a stolen matrimonial speculation to Calais. She is as highly respected as her friend Mrs. F.L. is beloved here. Who the deuce is that strange-looking character yonder, enveloped in a boat cloak and muffled up to the eyes with a black handkerchief? That is a very important personage in a watering place, I assure you, replied Crony, being no other than the celebrated Peter Paragraph, the London correspondent to the Morning Post, who involves, to use his own phrase, the whole hemisphere of fashion in his mystifications and reports. Informs the readers of that paper how many rays of sunshine have exhilarated the Brightonians during the week, furnishes a correct journal of fogs, rains, storms, shipwrecks, and hazy mists. And above all, announces the arrivals and departures, mixing up royal and noble fashionables and kitchen stuff, in the same beautiful obscurity of diction. Peter was formerly a friser, but has long since quitted the shaving and cutting profession for the more profitable calling of collector of en dits and puffs extraordinaire. The swaggering, broad-shouldered blade who follows near him, with a frontispiece like the Red Lion, is the well-known radical, Jack S.H., now agent to the French consul for this place, and the unsuccessful candidate for the independent borough of Shoreham. A complete eccentric, by all my hopes of pleasure. Crony, who are those 2 dashing divinities, who come tripping along so lively yonder? Daughters of 315 pleasure, replied the cynic. A pair of justly celebrated Paphians, West End comets, who have come here, no doubt, with the double view of profit and amusement. The plump-looking dame on the right is Ogta Sirai, otherwise Lady H.E., so called after the PNSSAA, her godmamma. Her father, old Obt, one of QNCT's original German pages, brought up a large family in respectability, under the fostering protection of his royal mistress. Ogta, at the early age of 15, eloped from St. James's on a matrimonial speculation with a young musician, Mr. NYC, himself a boy of 18. From such a union, what could be expected? A mother at 16 and a neglected, dishonored wife, before she had counted many years of womanhood. If she fell an unresisting victim to the seduction which her youth, beauty, and musical talents attracted, her stars were more to blame than she. Let it be recorded, however, that her conduct as wife and mother was free from reproach, until a depraved, unnatural man, who, by the way, has since fled the country, set her the example of licentiousness. Amongst her earliest admirers was the wealthy citizen, Mr. S.M., a bon vivant, a 5-bottle man, who has, not unaptly, been since nominated a representative in PL for one of the Cinque Ports. To this witty man's generous care she is indebted for an annuity, which, with common prudence, ought to secure her from want during her own life. On her departure from this lover, which proceeded entirely from her own caprice and restless extravagance, the vain Ogta launched at once into all the dangerous pleasures of a Cyprian life. The court, the city, and the change paid homage to her charms. One high in the RLHHID wore her chains for many months, and it was probably more in the spirit of revenge for open neglect than admiration of such a 316 faded beau, that Lady GB admitted the E of BA to usurp the husband's place and privilege. It is extraordinary that the circumstance just mentioned, which was notorious, was not brought forward in mitigation of the damages for the loss of conjugal joys, and which a jury of citizens, with a tender feeling for their own honor, valued at £10,000. My Lord GB pocketed the injury and the 10,000, and his noble substitute has since made the amende honorable to public morals, by uniting his destinies with an amiable woman, the daughter of a doctor of music, and a beauty of the sister country, who does honor to the rank to which she has been so unexpectedly elevated. Mrs. C.I. had no acquaintance of her own sex in the world of gaiety but one, the beautiful, interesting Mademoiselle St. MGT, then, 1812 and 1813, in the zenith of her charms. The gentle Adelde, whose sylph-like form, graceful movements, and highly polished manner delighted all who knew her, formed a strange and striking contrast to the short, fat, bustling, salacious Ogta, whose boisterous bon mots and horse-laughical bursts astonished rather than charmed. Both, however, found abundance of admirers to their several tastes. It was early in the spring of 1814 that the subject of this article had the good or evil fortune to attract the eye of a noble lord of some notoriety, who pounced on his plump prey with more of the amorous assurance of the bird of Jove than the cautious hoverings of the wary H-key. Love like his admitted of no delay. Preliminaries were soon arranged under the auspices of that experienced matron, Madame de Tiquiville, whose address, in this delicate negotiation, extorted from his lordship's generosity, besides a check on HD and GBBS for a cool 100, the payment of Brother Martin's old score of long standing for bed and board at Madame's house of business, Little St. Martin's 317 Street. The public have been amused with the ridiculous story of the mock marriage, but whatever were his faults or follies, and he is since called to his account, his LDSB stands guiltless of this. 'Tis true, her ladyship asserted, nay, we believe, swore as much. But she is known to possess such boundless imaginative faculties that her nearest and dearest friends have never yet been able to detect her in the weakness of uttering a palpable truth. The assumption of the name and title arose out of a circumstance so strange, so ridiculous, and so unsavory, that, with all our gusto for fun, we must omit it. Suffice it to say that it originated in what? Gentle reader in a dose of physic. For further particulars, apply to Mrs. CL of the CSLA SDHLL. After this strange event, which imparted to her ladyship all the honors of the coronet, Mrs. C.I. was to be seen in the park from day to day, the envy of every less fortunate dolly, and the horror of the few friends which folly left her lordly dupe. In this state of doubtful felicity her ladyship rolled on, for she almost lived in her carriage for 3 years, when, alas, by some cruel caprice of love, or some detected intrigue, or from the holy scruples of his lordship's reverend adviser, Padre Ambrosio, this connection was suddenly dissolved at Paris, when Mrs. C, no longer acknowledged as my lady, was at an hour's notice packed off in the Dilly for Dover, and her jewels, in half the time, packed up in their casket and dispatched to Lafitte's, in order to raise the ways and means for the peer and his ghostly confessor. Her ladyship's next attempt at notoriety was her grand masked ball at the Argyle Rooms in 1818, an entertainment which, for elegant display and superior arrangement, did great credit to her taste, or to that of her broad-shouldered Milesian friend, to whom it is said the management of the whole was committed. The expense of this act of folly has been variously 318 estimated, and the honor of defraying it gratuitously allotted to an illustrious commander, whose former weakness and culpability has been amply redeemed by years of truly RL benevolence and public service. We can state, however, that neither the purse or person of the royal decontributed to the eclat of the fête. An amorous Hebrew city clerk, who had long looked and loved at humble distance, taking advantage of his uncle's absence on the continent in a diamond hunting speculation, having left the immediate jewel of his soul, his cash, at home, the enamored youth seized the very nick-o time, furnished half the funds for the night, for half a morning's conversation in Upper Y Street. Her ladyship's indefatigable industry furnished the other moiety in a couple of days. A Mr. ZCHY contributed 50, which, coming to the ears of his sandy-haired lassie, his own paid forfeit of his folly, to their almost total abstraction from the thick head to which they project with asinine pride. Since this splash in the whirlpool of fashionable folly, her ladyship, for she clings to the rank with all the tenacity of a fencible field officer, has lived in comparative retirement near EDGERD, nursing a bantling of the new era and singing John Anderson My Joe to her now gude man, only occasionally relapsing into former gaieties by a sly trip to Box Hill or Virginia Water with the grandson of a barber, a flush but gawky boy, who, forgetting that it is to the talents and judicial virtues of his honored sire he owes his elevation, rejects that proud and wholesome example, and, by his arrogance and vanity, excites pity for the father and contempt for the son. Her ladyship, who by her own confession has been just 29 for the last 10 years, may still boast of her conquests. Her amour with the yellow dwarf of G versus RP is too good to be lost. They are followed by one who, time was, would have chased them round the Stane and into cover with all the spirit of a true sportsman. But his days of revelry are past. That is the celebrated Rouet, CL, a trifle light as air. Yet in nature's spite a very ultra in the pursuit of gallantry. To record the number of frail fair ones, to whose charms he owned ephemeral homage, would fill a volume. The wanton's wife whose vices sunk her from the drawing-room to the lobby, the kitchen wench whose pretty face and lewd ambition raised her to it, the romance-bewildered 5 miss, and the rude unlettered 6 villager, the hardened drunken profligate, and the timid half-ruined victim, the almost infant Jenny, have all in turn tasted his bounty and his wine, have each been honored with a page in his trifles. Of his caresses he wisely was more chary. Which of the frail sisterhood has not had a ride in G else worn out in the service one, and which in its day might be said to roll mechanically from CL to CSSD, with almost instinctive precision? But his days of poesy and nights of folly are now past. Honest C has taken the hint from nature, and retired at once from the republics of Venus and of letters. A kind, a generous, and a susceptible heart like his must long ere this have found, in the arms of an amiable wife, those unfading and honorable joys which, reflection must convince him, were not to be extracted from those foul and polluted sources from whence he sought and drew a short-lived pleasure. You know Crony's affection for a good dinner, and will not therefore be surprised that I had the honor of his company this day. But I faith, he deserved his reward for the cheerfulness and amusement with which he contrived to kill time. 3 Lady B.A. 4 Mrs. H.Y. 5 Louisa V. 6 Mrs. S.D.S. 7 Mrs. S-Min S. 320 in the evening, it was proposed to visit the libraries. But as these places of public resort are not always eligible for the appearance of a star, Crony and myself were dispatched first to reconnoiter and report to the Countess our opinions of the assembled group. The Association of Society has perhaps undergone a greater change in England within the last 30 years than any other of our peculiar characteristics. At least, I should guess so from Crony's descriptions of the persons who formerly honored the libraries with their presence, but whose names, if they now condescend to subscribe, are entered in a separate book, that they may not be defiled by appearing in the same column with the plebeian host of the 3 nations who form the united family of Great Britain. "Aye, sir," said Crony, with a sigh that bespoke the bitterness of reflection. I remember when this spot, Lucum's library, was the resort of all the beauty and brilliancy that once illumined the hemisphere of Calton Palace, the satellites of the heir apparent, the brave, the witty, and the gay, the soul-inspiring, mirthful band, whose talents gave a splendid luster to the orb of royalty, far surpassing the most costly jewel in his princely coronet. But they are gone, struck to the earth by the desolating hand of the Avenger Death, and have left no traces of their genius upon the minds of their successors. Of the motley assemblage which now surrounds us, it would be difficult to attempt a picture. The pencil of a Cruikshank or a Rowlandson might indeed convey some idea, but all weaker hands would find the subject overpowering. A mob of manufacturers, melting hot, elbowing one another into ill humor by their anxiety to teach their offspring the fashionable vice of gaming, giving the pretty innocents a taste for loo, which generally ends in loosening what little purity of principle the prejudice of education has left upon their intellect. In our more fashionable hells, wine and choice liqueurs are the stimulants to vice. Here, the seduction consists in the strumming of an ill-toned piano, to the squeaking of some poor discordant whom poverty compels to public exposure, and who, generally being of the softer sex, pity protects from the severity of critical remark. I need not say our report to the Dalmains was unfavorable, and the divine little countess, frustrated in her intentions of honoring the libraries with her presence, determined upon promenading up the west cliff, attended by old crony and myself. The bright-eyed goddess of the night emitted a ray of more than usual brilliancy, and o'er the blue waters of the deep spread forth a silvery and refulgent luster that lent a charm of magical inspiration to the rippling waves. For what of nature's mighty works can more delight than? Circling ocean, when the swell by zephyrs borne from off the main, heaves to the breeze and sinks again. The deep murmuring of the hollow surge as it rolls over the pebble beach, the fresh current of saline air that braces and invigorates, and the uninterrupted view of the watery expanse, are attractions of delight and contemplation which are nowhere to be enjoyed in greater perfection than at Brighton. The serenity of the evening induced us to pass the barrier of the chain pier, and bend our steps towards the projecting extremity of that ingenious structure. An old Welsh harper was touching his instrument with more than usual skill for an itinerant professor, while the plaintive notes of the air he tuned accorded with the solemnity of the surrounding scene. "I could pass an evening here," said the Countess, in a somewhat contemplative mood, "in the society of kindred spirits, with more delightful gratification than among the giddy throng who meet at Almack's." Crony bowed to the ground, overpowered by the 322 compliment, while your humble servant, less obsequious, but equally conscious of the flattering honor, advanced my left foot sideways, drew up my right longitudinally, and touched my beaver with a congé that convinced me I had not forgotten the early instructions of our old Eton posture-master, the all-accomplished Signor Angelo. "A worry hextonishing verk, this here pier," said a fat little squab of a citizen, sidling up to Crony like a full-grown porpoise. "Worry hexpensive and worry useless, I thinks," continued the intruder. Crony reared his crest in silent indignation, while his visage betokened an approaching storm. But a significant look from the Countess gave him the hint that some amusement might be derived from the animal, who, without understanding the contempt he excited, proceeded, "Vun of the new bubble company's specs, I supposes, vat old daddy Boreas vil blow ave some night in a hurricane. It puts me worry much in mind of a two-bottle man." "Why so?" said Crony. "Because it's only half-seas hover." This little civic Jew disparate made his peace with us by producing a hearty laugh, in which he did not fail to join in unison. "But are you aware of the usefulness and national importance of the projector's plans?" said Crony. "Not I," responded the citizen. "I hates all projections of breweries, bridges, buildings, and boring companies, from the Golden Lane spec to the Waterloo, from thence up to the New Street, and down to the tunnel under the Thames, which my banker, Sir William Curtis, says is the greatest bore in London." "But humanity, sir," said Crony, "has, I hope, some influence with you, and this undertaking is intended not only for the healthful pleasure of the Brighton visitors, but for the convenience of vessels in distress and the landing of passengers in bad weather." "Aye, there it is, that's hexactly vat I thought. to help our rich people more easily out of 323 the country, and bring a set of poor half-starved foreigners in. I'm told it's to be carried right across the channel in time, and then the few good ones have left will be marching off to the enemy. This conceit amused the Countess exceedingly, and was followed by many other equally strange expressions and conjectures, among which Crony contrived to persuade him that great amusement was to be derived in bobbing for mackerel and turbot with the line, a pleasure combining so much of profit in expectancy that the old citizen was, at last, induced to admit the utility of the chain pier. Retracing our steps towards the Stane, we had one more good laugh at our companion's credulity, who expressed great anxiety to know what the huge wheel was intended for, which is at the corner by the barrier, and throws up water for the use of the town, but which, Crony very promptly assured him, was the grand action of the improved roasting apparatus at the York Hotel. We now bade farewell to our amusing companion, and proceeded to view the new plunging bath at the bottom of East Street, built in the form of an amphitheater, and surrounded by dressing rooms, with a fountain in the center, from which a continued supply of salt water is obtained. The advantages may be great in bad weather, but to my mind there is nothing like the open sea, particularly as confined water is always additionally cold. On our arrival at home, a parcel from London brought the enclosed from Tom Echo, upon whom the sentence of rustication has, I fear, been productive of fresh follies. Dear Heartily, having cut college for a bolt to the village 8, I expected to have found you in the Bay of Condolence 9, but here you left your moorings lately. 8 London, so called at Oxford. 9 the consolation afforded by friends when plucked or rusticated. To waste the ready among the sharks at Brighton. Though not quite at point non-plus, I am very near the United Kingdoms of Sans Souci and Sans Success. 10, and shall bring to and wait for company in the province of Bacchus. I have only just quitted Eger Haven and been very near the Wall 11. Have sustained another dreadful fire from Convocation Castle, 12, which had nigh shattered my forelights and was very near being blown up in attempting to pass the Long Hope. 13. If you wish to save an old Etonian from East Jeopardy 14, set sail directly, and tow me out of the river tick into the region of rejoicing. Then will we get bosky together, sing old songs, tell merry tales, and spree and sport on the States of Independency. Yours truly. The Oxford Rustic. London. Tom Echo. P. S. I should not have cut so suddenly, but joined Bob Transit and Eglantine in giving 2 of the old bigwigs a flying leap t'other evening, as they left Christ Church Hall, in return for rusticating me, to escape suspicion, broke away by the mail. I know your affection for a good joke, so induced Bob to book it, and let me have the sketch which I here enclose. 10 riddance of cares, and ultimately of sixpences. 11 the depot of invalids, Dr. Wall being a celebrated surgeon, whose skill is proverbial in the cure of the Headington or Bagley fever. For a view of poor Tom during his suffering, see plate by Bob Transit. 12 the House of Convocation in Oxford, when the 25 heads of colleges and the masters meet to transact and investigate university affairs. 13 the symbol of long expectation in studying for a degree. 14 terrors of anticipation. The remaining phrases have all been explained in an earlier part of the work. 325 . Mad as the Dalmains must think me for obeying such a summons, I have just bade them adieu, and am off tomorrow by the earliest coach for London. The only place I have omitted to notice, in my sketches of Brighton, is the clubhouse on the Stane Parade, where a few old rooks congregate, to keep a sharp lookout for an unsuspecting green one or a wealthy pigeon, who, if once netted, seldom succeeds in quitting the trap without being plucked of a few of his feathers. The greatest improvement to a place barren of foliage and the agreeable retirement of overshadowed walks is the Royal Gardens, on the level at the extremity of the town, in a line with the Stane enclosures as you enter from the London road. The taste, variety, and accommodation displayed in this elegant place of amusement renders it certainly the most attractive of public gardens, while the arrangements are calculated to gratify all 326 classes of society without the danger of two crowded in assemblage. Let us see you when term ends, and in the interim expect a long account of sprees and sports in the village. Horatio Hartley. Metropolitan Sketches,